Shalom and welcome everyone to the ICEJ weekly webinar. I'm David Parson, Senior Vice President and Spokesman for the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, coming to you from a city that's been under attack from Iranian missiles in recent days, the whole country of Israel, the United States at war with the Iranian regime. I want to emphasize it's a war against the Islamic regime there and not the people. And we're going to talk about that today with a special update on this conflict with our friend Ramin Parsa, who is a Iranian born, was a Muslim converted to Christianity. He found Jesus and fled to Turkey and the United States, felt called into ministry as a pastor, and then married a Messianic Jew who was an Israeli citizen. He now lives in Jerusalem. We did a webinar last year with him. If you want that full testimony on our YouTube channel, you can find it there. And we talked to him in mid-January in the middle of the mass protests against the regime, and he's come back to help give us a report on what's happening on the ground. Good to have you, Ramin.
Thank you, Brother David. Good to be with you.
Okay, we're recording this a day before our broadcast on Thursday afternoon, and just to make sure we have this in the can, we don't know what's going to develop. But Ramin, it's hard to get news out of Iran. They've shut down all the social media, internet, the media out of the reports out of there are heavily government controlled. But you have family there, first of all, and how are they doing and what are you hearing from them?
Thank you, Brother David. Yes, I have lost contact with my family. Last time I spoke was just a few maybe minutes before the war began. When I heard the sirens, I contacted my sisters and told them to leave the city because I knew this is coming, and I told them to leave the city. That's
They're
the
in
last.
Tehran?
No, they're in Shiraz in the south.
Okay.
This is where King Cyrus is buried,
Yes.
and I just asked him to leave the city, go outside the city, and but this is like God turning the mourning into joy, because just a few weeks ago we all were mourning for the massacre of the Iranian people by the hand of the Islamic regime, and this is like God is taking revenge from this evil regime and bringing it down because of all the bloodshed and massacre of children, women, innocent men. And it's amazing to witness this. And a lot of people, you watch the Western media, they think, oh, America, Israel attacking Iran. As you said it correctly, this is not a war against Iran. This is a war against an evil Islamic regime that is occupying Iran. And that's why the Iranian people are rejoicing. They're jubilant. They're saying we're happy that we're free at last. We are getting liberated. And they love Israel. They're sending thank you messages, videos to Prime Minister Netanyahu, to Israel, to President Trump and America, and they're thanking them for freedom, both Iranians outside and inside. Although connection is very, very limited in Iran, some people have access to Starlink, but those who do, they really are rejoicing and happy that finally the oppressors are being hit and they're being brought down. So they're very happy.
Yeah, and this is all happening right as we are at Purim, this unique biblical holiday where the Jewish people celebrate a victory over their enemies within the Persian Empire. The king actually favored Mordecai and got tricked into signing this decree to kill all the Jews, and he regretted it, and thank God a second decree allowed them to defend themselves. And it is a big turnaround right now. Now, Ramin, the last time we spoke, we had you on in mid-January, we thought there were maybe between 3,000 and 10,000 dead, or 12,000, but now it's over 32,000 are the best estimates. And yet no one, people are, crying about some girls' school in southern Iran that the U.S. or IDF hit, and these poor girls. These are UN officials condemning this, and where was their voice with all those people who died. How much of an impact did what was it, January 8th and 9th, when the worst massacres occurred, how much of an impact did that have on the Iranian people?
Well, I mean, we saw again the hypocrisy of UN. UN literally has become an anti-Semitic, anti-Israel organization that are issuing condemnations and resolutions against Israel more than the regime in Iran that has been oppressing, killing, murdering people for past 47 years. And yes, in January 8 and 9, they massacred about actually 86,000. The numbers are going up every moment because they're counting and finding dead people, families finding their dead loved ones that they were murdered by the regime. And so the numbers are going up, and there's an estimate of about 100,000. And they did that in just a few short days. They massacred all those people. And nobody said anything about it, not UN. And not only they didn't say anything, they sided with the regime. The head of UN sent a congratulation message to the Islamic regime for the anniversary of revolution just a few days after massacring 86,000 innocent women and children. And you see the media, none of those pro-Palestinian, free Palestine protesters came out on the streets to supposedly defend women and children. The same people who claim that they care for women and children in Gaza, suddenly they're silent. And this shows their hypocrisy, that they don't really care about women and children. That was just an open season on Israel to attack Israel, to demonize Israel. And in 2 years of Israel defending itself against all these Islamic terrorists on 7 fronts, there's an estimate about 60,000 people killed in the span of 2 years. And that is a war. And vast majority of that number were Hamas and Islamic terrorists who were killed in the battle. And yet, in Iran, we have 86,000 civilians killed, unprovoked, people who are unarmed, and there's nothing they have said about it. Not media, not the even international community. Most of them were silent, and most of those people who actually were pro-Palestinians, they're actually defending the regime in Iran, which is absolutely horrible and horrifying to see that these people don't care about civilians; they only care about attacking Israel.
Yeah. Now, we talked last Friday to catch up a little and set up this week's webinar with you. And I remember you said something about, well, Purim is next Tuesday, Wednesday, and who knows, by then we may see Haman hung. Tell us your feelings and what you think the Iranian people feel about the targeting, the successful targeting of Ayatollah Khomeini in the first hour of the war.
Absolutely. Haman and the Ayatollah, they have so much in common. First of all, none of them were Iranians. This Haman was an Agagite. He was the descendant of King Agag of the Amalekites. He was the king of Amalekites who somehow came to Persia and got into power under King Xerxes. And then he was angry with Mordecai because Mordecai would not bow to him. That's how he started. But he had this historical hatred toward the Jewish people. And when he found out he's Jewish, he was all the more determined to kill the Jews and Mordecai. And this is similar with the Ayatollah and Islam. In 7th century, Muhammad told the Jews to believe in Allah, and they rejected him. They said, no, we don't bow before your idol. And he was so angry, and since then he decided to kill the Jews and Christians. And so what we see today is a continuation of what happened in 7th century, that Muhammad was angry just like Haman, because the Jews and Christians did not bow before his idol called Allah, the moon god of Arabia. And this is why they began to conquer and murder and kill Jews and Christians. Muhammad said himself, he said, I will not allow a single Jew or Christian to remain in the Arabian Peninsula. And he did that. That's why there's no church in Mecca, in Medina. They killed all the Christians and Jews. And this is the continuation. The Ayatollah wants to destroy the Jewish people. He wanted to destroy the Jewish people because he hates the Jews, he hates the Christians. And the Bible is illegal in Iran past 47 years. Bible has been illegal. We have smuggled tens of thousands of Bibles into Iran through the border with Turkey. And millions of Iranians have become believers. They have rejected Islam because they have seen the dark ideology of Islam, how oppressive it is. So basically, this Ayatollah has been shouting death to America, death to Israel, wanted to wipe out Israel off of the map. They actually had a clock counting down on the street, counting down that for Israel's existence, that Israel will be no more in a few years. And they had a countdown clock. And that clock was bombed in the first war in June. And now the Ayatollah is gone. So we see this is God showing us that He is the same yesterday, today, forever. He protects His covenant people, the Jewish people, and those who attack Israel, curse Israel, will be cursed. And it's amazing, when I was a kid, I was going to school. Every morning they told us to shout, "Death to America, death to Israel." And they would read the Quran to us. And in those days, there was no social media. Everything was closed, and the regime told us so much propaganda against Jews and Israel. But now, after all those years, now the Iranian people are wishing death on the Ayatollah, his sons, which happened to him, and cursing everything they told about Israel to curse Israel and Jews is happening to themselves. They used to burn Israeli flag, American flag. Now the people are burning the flag of the Islamic regime, and they're cursing them. They saying death to Ayatollah, death to Islamic regime, down with the regime. So exactly what God told Abraham: those who curse Israel will be cursed, and the curse return to themselves. And you see now that they're being hit and they're being eliminated one by one, and Iran will be free from this regime. And this will cause a shock to the Muslim world and will lead millions of Muslims out of Islam. Already, I've seen hundreds of videos from Afghans who are so inspired by the Iranian people. They are saying, we also want to fight for our rights. We also want to be free from Taliban. And I've seen Turkish people making videos and saying, what, we're so afraid that Turkey will become like Iran under Ayatollahs because of Erdogan. So this is already inspiring a lot of people in the neighborhood. And just as in 1979, this regime infected the whole region, impacted the region in a negative way with all the terror proxies, with all violence and chaos, exporting terrorism, weapons, missiles, drones. I think when the regime in Iran will fall and Iran is free, Iran will impact the region in a good way, in a positive way. And it will become an example to the nations to break off from the yoke of Islam and to be free, and that there is an opportunity, there's a way to break free and to have a good day ahead of you.
Yeah. You mentioned people turning against Islam in the region. It's very interesting because when the Ayatollah Khomeini came from Paris and overthrew the Shah of Iran, he brought in the Islamic Revolution, and their primary goal was to export it to the region. But now there's a revolt against Islam, a counter revolt that I think is very important for the destiny of the whole region. But I want to get into that. It was probably before your time, but how much was the hatred of Israel and the Jews a priority when they took over in '79? What is it a primary motivating factor, and is it central to this export of the Islamic Revolution? It seems history shows it is.
Absolutely, absolutely it is. And if you go back in the history, if you study the Yom Kippur War, when Yom Kippur War happened, because at that time, the only two countries who were pro-America, pro-West, were America and Israel. The rest of the countries in the region were pro-Soviets. And there were no Ba'ath parties in Syria, in Iraq, and in Egypt with Abdul Nasser. These people were pro-Soviets and allies with the Soviet Union. And the only two countries who were pro-America were America and Iran. And in 1973, when Yom Kippur War happened, actually Golda Meir contacted President Nixon and said, we need fighter jets. We lost fighter jets, we need help. And it was like 2 or 3 in the morning in America. And President Nixon woke up and he said, when I was a child, my grandma would put me on his lap and would read the Bible for me, and said, if you ever are in a position to help the Jewish people, don't hesitate. And he said, I think this is the time. But he said, it will take time for me to send you planes. So he contacted the Shah of Iran, the king of Iran, and he told him to please send fighter jets for Israel. And he sent fighter jets to Israel to defend Israel. And I actually, when I was pastoring in the States, I had a church member who used to be a fighter jet pilot. He said, I saw with my own eyes painting the fighter jets to send them to Israel and to help Israel. So that's why also the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamic countries like Egypt at that time, the Pan-Arabism, they saw Shah as an enemy because Shah had recognized Israel as a state, and at that time was the only country who had recognized Israel as a state beside Turkey, which was under Erdogan, and excuse me, under Ataturk, and later it was a secular country, not like now. But Iran was one of the only countries who had recognized Israel in this region, and that's why the Palestinians and all these anti-Israel countries, they hated the Shah. And in fact, the Palestinians under Arafat, they trained terrorists and they sent them into Iran to fight against Shah, armed terrorists. And they were doing guerrilla fighting, fighting against the Shah, terrorizing, killing. And they basically helped a revolution to happen, the Palestinians. And this is why, from the very beginning, from the very get-go, they began their hatred against Israel. They took over Israeli embassy in Tehran, an American embassy in Tehran. They took the embassy hostage 444 days. The diplomats in the American embassy were hostage, which it was a crisis under Carter administration. And then because of Reagan's peace through strength, he was able to get them out. And also the Israeli diplomats were smart and they left. They knew the nature of this regime and they left. So they took over the Israeli embassy and turned it to a Palestinian embassy. And that's why since then, this regime, the goal of this regime has been to murder and to destroy Jews and to destroy Israel from the very get-go. And that's why all these proxies were like a noose around the neck of Israel, with the Hamas and then Hezbollah and Syria. And then you had the Houthis and you had all these even terrorists in the Judea and Samaria. So the regime's goal for past 47 years, they shouted death to America, death to Israel. And they told me as a child, they told me they wanted to wipe Israel off of the map. And there was nothing to hide. I mean, they were saying it plainly. And they were encouraging us. There was a day called Quds Day, where they would take the students out and they would burn Israeli flag. And they told us, if you don't come to these rallies where they're flag burning and shouting death, we would not give you a grade. So a lot of the students were forced to go because they would not get their grade in the school.
When were you born?
I was born in 1985.
85.
This was about 6 years after the revolution. I was born in the middle of the war with Iraq, the Iran-Iraq war.
But even then, they were educating. When you started school from first grade, they
Absolutely.
educated you to hate Israel and the Jews. Yeah.
Absolutely. Every morning in the school, shouting death to America, death to Israel. In our textbook, we had pictures of Israeli soldiers. It was caricature, not real pictures. They were pointing a gun at a Palestinian boy, and the boy is crying, of course, to demonize Israel. And also in our TV, on our TV, government-controlled TV, they showed us videos, movies that they made, and they showed that the Jews are chasing after a Muslim boy to capture and kill him and use his blood to make matzah bread for Passover. I mean, it's stuff like that. They really demonized the Jews. They told us Jews and Christians are dirty, they are unclean, and they are infidels, and they demonized the Israelis. And they told us that the only way to get to heaven is to become a jihadist, to become a shahid, which is in their language means martyr, and that you have to go.
The only guaranteed way to make it. Yeah.
Exactly, and then you get only two virgins and all these things.
Yeah.
So they really the regime never built hospitals or railroad or schools. All of the hospitals in Iran built by the Shah of Iran. The railroads were built by the grandfather, the father of the Shah, Reza Shah. And schools, the military was built by the Shah. And this regime didn't build anything except and exporting terrorism, sending money, all these groups, and impoverishing Iran. And then they began the nuclear program, where they basically cost the Iranian people $2 trillion, $2 trillion of the Iranians because of sanctions and all of the cost, just because this regime wants to make the weapon to wipe Israel off of the map. It's amazing. That's why the Iranian people, and on top of that, they oppress the Iranian people, impoverish them. They beat the woman over the way they dress, if you don't have enough hijab. and the social oppression. Music was illegal. Those VHS players. Remember those VHS players? You put them in those were illegal. Cassette players were illegal in Iran. Cards, the cards you play with, they were illegal. I mean, everything was illegal. And this regime just took everything from people. And that's why 47 years of that has made the people of Iran so angry. And they hate that regime. And they're so happy to finally be liberated. And they're excited and they're happy.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there, because I told Khomeini while he was in exile in Paris, he would record sermons, fiery sermons against the regime and all, on cassette tapes, and smuggle them into Iran. So he knew, and that fueled the revolution. And so he knew the power of a message on a cassette or whatever. So he banned them once he was in power. That's interesting.
Right. And unfortunately, BBC also was broadcasting his sermons on radio into Iran.
BBC Persian.
BBC Persian. They have a big role. And even right now, BBC Persia is very, very bad. They're trying to save the regime, And when there's a terrorist attack in Israel, the whole BBC is a scam. They're really, really fake news. They favor the Islamists and they hate Israel, and they have been, reporting falsehoods against Israel. And the Iranian people know that, and they don't like BBC because BBC helped the revolution to happen. So they're really unhappy with that.
I want to stay on this point of the centrality of destroying Israel as part of this export of the Islamic revolution, because people are asking right now, the U.S. and Israel said this was a preemptive strike, and even the president of France, Macron, says, well, you have to have an imminent threat. Where's the imminent threat? Some are saying this is an illegal action. And the question, where's the imminent threat? It's the wrong question. The right question is, why did the world wait so long to confront this in a serious way? This export of hatred, of demonizing Israel, trying to get rid of it, of demonizing America, of stirring revolutions in other countries where you are impinging on the sovereignty of other nations in the region and trying to topple them as well. I can think of so many instances where the world was justified to intervene, especially America after the Beirut barracks bombing, 240 some Marines dead, the French lost some soldiers there. So many instances where nations, Iran carried out terror attacks, Argentina, in Saudi Arabia. You start thinking about it. Why wasn't this regime confronted earlier?
Well, I mean, for the Iranian people, it's amazing how the Iranian people have awoken and seen the reality of the politics in Europe, and they see exactly what's happening with the leftists, with all these liberals who self-righteously attack, President Trump, Israel, and then they attack all those, but then they silent in the face of when the Iranians are going through a. So Iranian people have seen that. They don't like France, like Macron, because actually it was France who flew the Ayatollah into Iran. It was the Air France. And the Iranian people say, thank you for this gift that destroyed our lives. You brought this guy, this maniac, into Iran, and look at what they have done to our lives. And you're right. You're absolutely right that the world waited so long. This regime was tolerated so much, despite all the terrorism threats, what they did in Iraq, in Yemen with the Houthis. The regime in Iran is responsible for the massacre in Syria, because when Assad was almost falling, I think it was back in 2013 or 14, when it was the civil war in Syria, it was the regime in Iran who sent its terror groups, the Quds forces under Soleimani, and they massacred 600,000 Syrians. 600,000 Syrians were killed. And the regime in Iran was responsible. Look at Yemen. All the famine and the hunger in Yemen is because of the regime in Iran, the war and the terrorism there. In Iraq, the militias, all the roadside bombs against the American soldiers, and all the massacre in Iraq. And look at Lebanon, all the bombing is in Lebanon and attacks against Israel, October 7, which was the climax of all of that. And we see that that this regime was tolerated. And not only that, during Obama, they sent them a pallet of cash, $150 billion cash money to a terrorist regime that has spent every single dollar of that money on terrorism because the life of people didn't improve. When sanctions were lifted, nothing changed for the people of Iran. Only the regime got stronger and richer and was able to carry more terrorism, hire more terrorists, to be able to recruit more militias and so forth. The same thing we see that under Biden, the regime was so happy because they could not believe the foolishness of the Biden administration. You know, during Biden, there were 125 attacks against American troops and American bases in Iraq, 125 in Syria. And the regime was laughing at its sleeves after the Afghanistan withdrawal. So the regime was so hopeful that, hey, we kicked out America out of Afghanistan. Now we're going to do it in Iraq and Syria. We're winning. And they were so happy. And then they didn't expect President Trump's return. And President Trump came. He's a man of his word. He's a great leader that has common sense understanding. And also Prime Minister Netanyahu. You know, both of them were out for a few years. And this regime did whatever they want. And then both of them came back, these two leaders, which I believe they're God appointed for such a time as this. And they began to face this regime. And first, Israel destroyed all the proxies. We thank God for Israel for doing that. You know, they're doing the dirty work of the world. They're basically cleaning up all this mess here in the Middle East with Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq, even in Judea and Samaria. So Israel has been cleaning up this area. And now they're going after the head of the snake. So Israel and America are doing the dirty work for the rest of the world, for France, which is irrelevant. You know, France is not the same France of the Napoleons, or France has no power. They have no influence whatsoever. They are, you know, their own country are being taken over by Islamists. Look at France, what's happening with terrorism. The Jews are hiding their identity because they're afraid. The Jews are fleeing France. So France is an irrelevant country because of all they have done with the leadership, with the foolishness of these leaders who always side with the wrong party. And they're not really true allies. The true ally is Israel that is fighting shoulder to shoulder with Americans against Islamic terrorists. And I applaud them for that. And just beautiful that what's happening in Iran. And I tell you, Iran will go overnight from number one enemy of Israel to number one friend and ally of Israel in the region. And also to one of the number one ally of America and US. And this is a just war, and it will have a very great reward for Israel and America. And all of those naysayers who are attacking President Trump and Israel for doing this, they will be ashamed when they see President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu flying into Iran to open the new embassies. They will be ashamed because this will have a great reward. Why this is different? Because, you know, I hear people in America, in the West, they say, oh, this is another Iraq war, you know, 25 years, boots on the ground, all the bloodshed and all the money spent and all the soldiers dying. But this is different. Iran is not Afghanistan and Iraq. The Iranian people, about 97%, 98%, they want this. They want this regime gone. They want America and Israel to free them. This was not the case in Afghanistan or in Iraq. The vast majority of Afghans and Iraqis, they hated America. They considered America as an infidel country, as an enemy, both before and after. But the Iranian people, you know, when 9/11 happened, the only people who had vigils and candles and were mourning and were sad were Iranians and Israelis, the Iranian people. When October 7 happened, all the Muslim countries were celebrating. The same thing with 9/11, they were celebrating. But the only people who were mourning were the Iranian people. They were mourning for the Israelis. So Iran is a whole different country. The people of Iran, as I said before, they're people of music, art, literature, poetry. They have a whole different culture. They're not, you know, like these people in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, running around with AK-47. Allahu Akbar, we want to do jihad. The Iranian people have dumped all of that. They have dumped Islam, and they want to be like Israel. They want to be like America. They want to have a life. They want to get married, have children, have family, have prosperity. They want to have a good life. They want to be free, to have music, and to dance and to sing. And 70% of Iranian population is under age 40. That means out of 100 people, 70 of them are under age 40. Young people have aspirations and they want to have dreams. They have dreams, but this regime has given them a dim and dark future, and that's why they don't want that. The horizon for them under this regime is dark, and that's why they don't want it. That's why they welcome this operation. They are. I've seen videos when U.S. and Israel bombing. The people say, "Thank you, Israel. Thank you, America." And this was not the case in Iraq and Afghanistan. When U.S. invaded Iraq, the Iraqis came on the roofs with AK-47 shooting at the helicopters. But Iranian people are so different. And even in the US, in Europe, when there was a protest, a rally after Prince Reza Pahlavi gave a call for people to come on the streets, the police in Germany and in Canada, in the US, they were so amazed because when there was pro-Palestinian protests, they were burning and vandalizing and painting on the police cars, writing graffitis on the walls, breaking windows. And the Iranian people were giving them flowers. They were like giving them cookies. I saw Iranians taking trash on the streets, putting them in trash bag because they didn't want to leave trash behind. So this is a whole different culture, and people don't understand this. And in Persian we have a saying that not everything that is round is a walnut. Just because Iran is between Afghanistan and Iran doesn't mean it's the same country. Because Iranian people have rejected Islam, and they're embracing Christianity. Millions have become Christians. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians outside Iran have become Christians. And imagine the whole nation is changing. And I believe Iran will be the first country in the Islamic history that will go from an Islamic country to a Christian country. And already first steps have been taken, because first is to get rid of Islam. That's why mosques are empty. That's why during the protest, people were burning the mosques. And why? Because they hate Islam, and also because the mosques are the basis for the Basij. And Basij is the groups that they go on the streets, they're paramilitia groups, that they enforce the will of the government over the people. They beat up people in the streets, they beat up women, and they are like an Islamic terrorist group. And that's why people burn in the mosques. This is a whole different. This was not the case in Afghanistan and Iraq. The people are different. They're changed. They have seen the true face of Islam, and they want a new dawn, a new beginning. The flag of Persia, the old flag, the one before revolution, is a lion and a sun. And when the revolution happened, they took the lion and the sun and they put Allah in Arabic. And Iranians are kicking Allah out. They want the lion back. And amazingly, the name of the operation of Israel in Iran against Ayatollahs is called Rising Lion. So it's prophetic, Lion of Judah coming to rescue the Iranian people. But it speaks volume. It speaks to you how Iranians are dumping Islam, and they are embracing the gospel, and they're distancing from Islam. They don't want Islamic identity. They are identifying with their Persian identity, which is King Cyrus. And who was King Cyrus? He was the first Gentile Zionist that helped and loved the Jewish people and liberated them from Babylon and brought them back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. Same thing with Artaxerxes. He sent Nehemiah to build the wall. He sent Ezra to teach the Torah to the Jews who had come back from Jerusalem. He sent gifts from his own treasury for the God of Israel, for the temple. And Darius, he fasted over time for Daniel, and he made a proclamation that everybody in my domain must fear the God of Daniel. So amazing. So when Iranians seeing the Persian history, the true Persian, and this was hidden from us. We didn't know all of this. When I was going to school, I was never told about Cyrus or Darius or Xerxes, although I was born an hour from their palace and their grave. But all day long, they told us about Islam and Muhammad and Ali and against Jews and Israel. So Iranian people have rejected that, and they're embracing the national history. We used to go to mosque for Persian New Year. Now Iranians are going to the grave, the resting place of King Cyrus. They celebrate there the New Year. So they are changing their names from Islamic names to Persian names. This was not the case in Afghanistan and Iraq. That's why it's a whole different place, whole different culture, whole different people. And that's why it will be a successful operation. And we will see the reward for America and for Israel, both strategically, and geopolitically, and also for the kingdom of God. Iran will go from a nation that has been sending terrorism, missiles, drones, funding terrorism, to a nation that will be sending missionaries, preachers, evangelists to the surrounding countries. It will
I,
be a different country.
I think you've done an excellent job here of making a critical distinction between, especially for American audience, between what happened to American forces in Iraq and Afghanistan and what can be expected in Iran. Estimates are between 90 to, you said 97% or 98 are opposed to the regime, but
Absolutely.
the other 2 or 3% are the ones who are armed and they are diehard. Just last question. We're on day 5 of this war. It was remarkable to see people out dancing in the streets and celebrating the death of Khamenei. How long can this regime hold on? How can you give us, just in the days ahead, any sort of foresight of how soon the end game might come where the people go out to the streets to try and topple this regime again?
Well, if U.S. and Israel continue at the same rate that they are hitting them, it will not take even maybe 2 weeks at most, because they're taking out the leadership and they're taking out the places where the anti-protest forces that they were killing people on the streets back in January. So Israel is hitting those. They're taking out the leadership now. The son of the Ayatollah became his replacement, and I'm sure Israel and America are going to take him out, and I'm praying that he will be taken out because he's a very evil man. He has stolen billions of dollars. He actually was running the country under his father. And that's why people hate him as much as his father, and they want him to be gone. Just like Haman and his sons, and he also needs to be gone. So once the leadership is taken out and those places are bombed, then there will be a call by the U.S., by Israel, by the Prince Reza Pahlavi for people to take on to the streets. And then those forces that were killing people, they will be weak or not even existing anymore. And people will do the rest because people are so excited. They want this regime to be gone. Already people were suffering economically. And now people, they have a hard time providing even daily food and bread. That's why this regime has no chance of surviving. There's so much blood between the people and this regime. They kill so many people. And President Trump and America, Israel, they have invested so much with all the troops, all the money spent to attack this regime. They're not going to leave it halfway through. They're going to go all the way through. In my opinion, it will take a few weeks, maybe 2 weeks, but this regime will be gone. The people will do the rest as they're being helped by America, and it's going to be a glorious day when Iran is free, and Iran will go from an ally of Russia, China, and North Korea to become an ally of the U.S. and Israel and the free world. And Iran has number 3 oil in the world, number 2 gas in the world, and Iran will be giving oil to India instead of giving to China. So this geopolitically has so much implications that people don't see, and it's going to help America and help Israel in the long term.
Yeah, this is the hopeful scenario we're all praying for, but there's one caution in it. Some have pointed to Venezuela, where President Trump went and arrested, detained Maduro, took him out, but put someone else from his regime in place who is now subservient to the U.S., and especially about the oil there. And the way Trump is talking, he's looking for someone who's in the country and maybe even part of the regime who will become something subservient, like a vassal to Trump, and flip the country. But do you think anyone in the regime can play that role where it needs to be completely replaced?
It will be completely replaced because the people don't want them. Because, as I said, there's so much blood.
That's
Venezuela.
The point. It's the people need to decide it.
Exactly, and not only that, Maduro, as bad as he didn't massacre 86,000 of his people on the streets. There's so much blood between the regime in Iran and the people. So no one in that regime that has rubbed shoulder with the Ayatollahs will be able to lead the country. People don't want them. So as soon as there's an election in Iran, this regime would be completely, even if there's a temporary government or something, as soon as there's an election, people will be electing the son of the Shah. And in my opinion, they want a constitutional monarchy, which means like UK, like, the Scandinavian countries, they have a king who is symbolic, and then there's a prime minister and a parliament that will make the decisions around the country. And people don't want this regime at all. They don't want anything to do with Islam. So this regime, the whole identity of that regime is Islamic Republic, Islamic regime. And people don't want anything to do with Islam. And there's nobody in that regime, because the regime was so careful that they will take out anyone that they deem as a threat or an opposition. So everybody in that regime was faithful to the regime, They were getting paid well, they had high positions, they had no corruptions. So anybody in that regime was on the side of the regime. That's why this regime has no chance of surviving, and no chance anybody with that regime be in power.
Yeah, they're all tainted and infected with this Islamic revolution.
Correct.
Okay, we thank you, Ramin Parsa, an Iranian-born pastor who now lives with his Messianic Jewish wife in Jerusalem. We're so glad to have had you on the program this week. Once more, right in the midst of this war. We're on, when this broadcasts, it'll be day 6. Who knows what happens in the coming days, but may it be a swift and decisive victory for Israel and the U.S. to turn the nation of Iran completely around. Amen. And freedom for the people.
If I can just ask the people to please continue to pray. In Exodus 17, when Amalekites came to fight with Israel, as long as Moses had his hands up, they would prevail. And when his hands were down, then the Amalekites would prevail. So please lift your hands up in prayer until full victory, until this regime is gone. God was so angry with King Saul because he did not finish the Amalekites. Prophet Samuel came and he said, "Why didn't you do what God told you?" And later on, and amazingly, Haman was descendant of the Amalekite, king of Amalekite, Agag, which King Saul spared his life. So his son and his descendant later on became Haman in Persia. So if you don't finish him now, there will be a problem later. So pray for full victory. Pray that the regime is confused, scattered, divided, that all their missiles and launchers will be destroyed, that drones be destroyed. Pray that God will just scatter them, confuse them, turn their counsel into foolishness, take away their wisdom, that this regime would collapse. Pray that the rest of the remaining of regime will be destroyed, and for full, complete victory. In the name of Yeshua. Amen.
Amen. Okay. Thank you, Ramin, for being with us today. Incredible insights. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our people have as well. So that's our show for today. We want to thank you for joining us on the ICJ Weekly webinar. Join us again next Thursday, 3 p.m. for our latest show. Lots happening in the region. Who knows what we'll be able to report on next week, but we're looking forward to it. Join us then. God bless you from Jerusalem.
Thank you for joining us today. Join us again next Thursday at 3 p.m. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on our social media platforms for more exclusive ICEJ content.